Si Uniza May 2, ito po nakikita natin. Hinarang po yan, Mr. President, hindi lang po nung nakikita nating white Chinese Coast Guard vessel na ang haba po niyan, Mr. President, ay 138 meters. Yung atin, 20 meters. Hindi lamang po yan dalawang yan, Mr. President, ang humarang. There were 5 Chinese Coast Guard vessels and, Mr. President, there were 12 Chinese militia vessels. Meron pa ho, Mr. President, and I'd like to show a photo na na-involved. Meron pa hong 5 umaali-aligid na Chinese Navy, Mr. President. And the Chinese Navy, these are the 5 People's Liberation Army Navy warships, are composed of 2 Type 056A guided missile corvettes, Vessel 629 and 623, and then a Type 053H3 light frigate, and then Type 052D destroyer, Mr. President. Destroyer na po yung humahabol doon sa dalawang maliliit na barko nating 20-footer at Mr. President. As I have said, Mr. President, this is very alarming because of the presence of 5 People's Liberation Army Navy warship.
Senator Francis Tolentino is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I fully support and associate myself with the privileged speech given by Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri. Mr. President, the August 5 water cannon incident is a blatant escalation of tensions being perpetrated by the Chinese Coast Guard. Mr. President, allow me now to provide some details relative to the incident which happened a few days ago. Mr. President, nakikita po natin sa larawang ito, and I hope this can be frozen for a while. Nasa harapan po yung maliit na barko ng Pilipinas na magsusupply ng provisions para sa Ayungin Shoal. Nasa kaliwa po, Mr. President, yung Chinese militia vessel. Nasa likuran naman po yung Chinese Coast Guard vessel. Mr. President, to make this clearer, Mr. President, ang atin pong maliliit na barko, kagaya po nung nasa harap, ay 20-footer. Ang pangalan po niyang barkong yan, Uniza May 1 at Uniza May 2. Si Uniza May 1 nakalusot, nakapagdala po ng pagkain, ng provisions, gamot, medicines at tubig. Nakapagdala po sila sa loob. Si Uniza May 2, ito po nakikita natin, yan po yung hinarang. Hinarang po yan, Mr. President, hindi lang po nung nakikita nating white Chinese Coast Guard vessel na ang haba po niyan, Mr. President, ay 138 meters. Yung atin, 20 meters. Hindi lamang po yan dalawang yan, Mr. President, ang humarang. There were 5 Chinese Coast Guard vessels and, Mr. President, there were 12 Chinese militia vessels. And these Chinese militia vessels moved to constrict the passage of both Uniza May 1 and Uniza May 2. Nakalusot lamang po si Uniza May 1. Yung pinakita po ni Senate President kanina na nabasa, ayun po si Uniza May 2. So Uniza May 2 po ay halos 2 oras pinaligiran. Hindi lamang po, Mr. President, ng 5 Chinese Coast Guard, 12 Chinese militia vessels. Meron pa ho, Mr. President, and I'd like to show a photo na na-involved. Ito po yung pinakita ni Senate President kanina, yung Chinese militia, Chinese Coast Guard 5201, and kasama pa rin dyan ang CCG 5304. Meron pa hong 5 umaali-aligid na Chinese Navy, Mr. President. And the Chinese Navy, these are the 5 People's Liberation Army Navy warships, are composed of 2 Type 056A guided missile corvettes, Vessel 629 and 623, and then a Type 053H3 light frigate, and then Type 052D destroyer, Mr. President. Destroyer na po yung humahabol doon sa dalawang maliliit na barko nating 20-footer at Mr. President. As I have said, Mr. President, this is very alarming because of the presence of 5 People's Liberation Army Navy warship and the Chinese militia maritime blocked the passage of UNISA May 2 vessel. Bumalik na po sila kasi basang-basa na po yung mga provisions. Basa na po yung mga bigas, basa na rin po yung mga radio equipment. Kaya bumalik na po sila after almost 2 hours of being encircled, Mr. President. Can we show the other picture? The harassment was so aggressive that only one resupply ship, as I have said, UNISA May 2, UNISA May 1 was successful in reaching BRP Sierra Madre, reducing the available food, water, and medicine of the crew in the following weeks. As I have said, Mr. President, the other supply vessel, UM2, was doused with water cannons and the unsafe maneuvers of the Chinese maritime militia for almost 2 hours while repeatedly attempting to enter Ayungin Shoal but had to turn back. The Chinese Coast Guard 5305 also conducted an unsafe maneuver against the Philippine Coast Guard, causing a near collision with BRP Malabrigo at a distance of less than 5 meters. Dalawa po yung barko natin doon, Mr. President, BRP Malabrigo and BRP Cabra. Ito po ay 44 meters lamang, Mr. President, as against their 138 meters. Napakaliit lang po nung dalawang barko ng ating Coast Guard. Mr. President, joining the Senate President, ladies and gentlemen, that August 5 water cannon incident cannot be allowed to be set aside and forgotten like all other unprovoked acts of aggression by the Chinese forces in the West Philippine Sea in the past years. It is high time that we in the legislature, along with the frontliners in the West Philippine Sea, support actions diplomatically, economically, and perhaps the other action in concert with our allies to enhance the capabilities of our forces, acting in accordance with international law, while also condemning the dangerous and illegal actions of Chinese forces within Philippine waters. As I speak, Mr. President, as we convene today, hindi ho natin alam po ano pa yung nangyayari. Baka meron pa hong nangyayari. Kaya ko lang po binanggit ito, and I support the Senate President, is that ngayon po, hindi lamang Chinese Coast Guard, but Chinese Navy ang kasali na ngayon. It is time to see an end to these blatant violations of international law and threats to Philippine sovereignty. Let us, as one country, support our uniformed services and fisherfolk as they lawfully ply and responsibly enjoy the bounties of the West Philippine Sea. Kanina po, Mr. President, and before I end, kanina po during the hearing conducted by Senator Jinggoy Estrada, yung Committee on National Defense, I raised the question, bakit po, Mr. President, sa ngayon, we have stopped accepting cadets coming from allied countries to enter into the Philippine Military Academy? Our cadets are now training in Annapolis, in the U.S. Naval Academy, in the U.S. Air Force Academy in West Point. But at the same time, while we condemn this, Mr. President, ang dami natin mga opisyales na nag-aaral pala sa Beijing Military Academy. Nandun po lahat sila. The chairman of the Senate Committee on Defense is now well apprised of this. And perhaps, Mr. President, it's about time that we show our support to our uniform services by giving them a patriotic guidance and direction. Again, Mr. President, I support the privileged speech of Senator Mig Subiri, and I reiterate, as a country, let us be united, support our uniform services, ang ating pong mga kasundaluhan, ang ating pong mga mangingisda na dapat po ay makinabang sa West Philippine Sea. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Laban Pinas.